Welcome to part 2 of assembling your political puppet picket project. By now, you've already established a working mechanism, or even maybe 2 working mechanisms on your puppet. If the material that you were building your mechanism on isn't sufficient, you can transfer those mechanisms onto a nicer finished material, i.e. a nicer cardboard, gator board, foam board, piece of wood, plastic board, really whatever you see fit for your project or whatever you might have access to. Make sure the cardboard that you're using for your final piece is free from bends, breaks, creases, folds, cracks, anything that might make the finish look bad or unusable or take away from the overall finish of the project. Once you've transferred your mechanisms onto a new piece of material, depending on that material, you may need to finish or clean the edge of that material. For example, if you're using cardboard, you might want to finish or clean the sides of the cardboard, make sure the edges aren't frayed, and you might want to fill any holes or gaps or cracks that are going to look unsightly or give you a finish that looks very much like it is cardboard. One thing you can do to close up those holes is fill the spaces on the side with a paper clay. You can also use a paper mache, a tape, plaster, or other clay material to essentially fill in the holes. You can also use a gel medium or a gesso, really any material that will cake up or close up those holes is ideal. Then looking at the object or the figure that you are representing, are there any areas on the puppet that you want to build up or create layers or texture or shape or form? On the puppet that I'm making, I decided to further embellish his face to give him more of a skeleton skull appearance in the face, to build out the chin and also to soften the transition from chin to neck, to clean up the ears, to add eyebrows, a nose, and lips, and higher cheekbones. I can go further along with this later when I'm applying different gel mediums. But so as to not waste the gel mediums, I decided to build up the material now with a paper clay. Paper clay will adhere to the cardboard very nicely, and it will also take gel mediums later on very nicely. Once I build up whatever layers or texture or finish to my material or to my main background object or piece of material, whatever I'm essentially building on top of, whatever my main form is, once I've built any additional shapes or structures or forms onto it, I can now put my base coat on. That base coat might be a gesso, it might be some sort of wipe on plaster, it could be a coating of a glue, Mod Podge, paper mache, it could be a paper clay, a different type of clay. It doesn't have to be paper. I just find paper clay works the best. But you're essentially going to want to get a starter coat onto your material. So anything can be fine. You can even just go with a primer, right? Like a white paint primer or even just an acrylic paint. A white is ideal, something that's a lighter color. If you use a darker color, you're going to have trouble later painting over a darker paint with lighter paint. So just make sure you think ahead. Once you've coated a base coat onto your cardboard, this will really help you identify any problem areas. That means any areas where maybe there's some dents or holes or cracking or just an ugly, unsightly surface, you might need to sand or adjust by adding more layers, more material, or unfortunately, maybe even start over if it's something drastic or structural. So, really pay attention to this first coat that you put on and how it sort of finishes the overall look of the puppet. If it looks good, there's nothing really to address. Now you can start with your finishing detail work. This essentially means going in with any last minute layers or colors or inking, anything you really want to do to start the finishing process of your puppet. After you've done any finishing touches, painting, layers, coatings, anything to that nature, you might want to put a protective coat or a sealant or a gloss, gel, matte, satin finish onto the outer layer of the paint, really just to help to protect it, to help preserve the colors, maybe to give it more of a gloss, maybe to give it more of a matte. It really depends on what medium or finish you're using, but it essentially will protect it and keep it sort of in a nice finished state of being. Once that's done, you're pretty much good to go. Just make sure that the mechanisms still move clearly and freely, that they don't get stuck or snagged on any of the paint or surfaces. You might have to go back in and sand or add some sort of protective layer between the two layers so that it can move smoothly and freely. Just make sure you test the mechanisms, make sure everything still works, and then it's ready to be presented. Try practicing or rehearsing with the puppet how you're going to present it, what you're going to say about the puppet, and make sure that it can basically go from one position to the next position freely and comfortably without getting snagged, right? This is essentially showing that your puppet works and that you have successfully built a mechanism or mechanisms that will allow it to go from 1 to 2, right? The first movement to the second movement freely without any issue, and making sure that the finish looks good, that there's no holes, dents, scratches, unfinished areas. Really just making sure that the puppet on a whole delivers on all the variables. Hopefully you've gotten to that point and your puppet is looking great and you're all set to present. Good luck.